I'm Tom Gentry, and this is Men Who Talk. It's brought to you by Begin Again Institute, a 2-week intensive program for men with intimacy disorders in Boulder, Colorado, where my friend and co-host Ed Tilton is the Chief Operations Officer. Ed and I wanted to have a series of conversations on some of the barriers we see that prevent men from living more authentic lives. We want to underscore the fact that healthy men do talk. We want to help men who often do struggle with intimacy be more true to themselves. And we want to help people who love men maybe understand them a little bit better. So please listen in, subscribe to the show, share this conversation with someone you love, and enjoy Men Who Talk. Thanks for coming. My name's Tom Gentry. I'm here with my buddy Ed Tilton, who is the operations director for the Begin Again Institute, which is a program for men with intimacy disorders in Boulder, Colorado. And he and I have done some podcast episodes together in the past. We both work a lot with men, and this topic of men and intimacy, I think it's safe to say, is close to both of our hearts. Mm-hmm. So we started talking about doing a podcast series on men and intimacy. And today we're going to talk about what intimacy is. I was having a conversation with somebody at lunch about this today, and I mentioned that I think a lot of people don't really understand what intimacy is. And she said, "You mean a lot of people or a lot of men?" And I said, well, I think it is true that a lot of men don't, but I think women probably understand it more. But I think people in general don't understand the value of it and how it works. And the fact that the act of us sharing our feelings, talking on an emotional level with another human being is what deepens connection.
Right.
And that is what intimacy actually is. And although women are better at that in general than men in Western society, I don't know that they really are as aware of how important it is in terms of quality of relationships. Mm-hmm. Now, that's me as a guy saying that. But first of all, I wanted to just say we're calling this Men Who Talk because something that I hear a lot, there's just this sort of expression that I hear that men don't talk. And I think the language that we use is really, really important. And the truth is that men do talk.
Right.
Unhealthy men don't talk. That's the truth. Mm-hmm. And I, because of my life experience, have had an entire adult life where emotional literacy was really important. Being able to talk about my feelings has been really integral in my life, in my healing, in my profession. And we're two guys who talk. So anyway, Ed, do you want to tell a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what you do? Maybe talk about what you guys do at Begin Again.
Yeah. I mean, so I think the easiest way of saying it, Begin Again Institute it's a 2-week closed group intensive model that helps men with intimacy disorders. And so there's a couple of things that are really pivotal or just pillars of the organization. And one of them is being that we view all addiction as an intimacy disorder. So for me, I had an intimacy disorder. What I would say is I had an intimacy disorder with alcohol. I was more likely to bond with alcohol than I was with other people. And I know that for a lot of other folks, they were more likely to bond with other things as opposed to to people as well on their own journey. So that's probably the first piece. The second piece is that we believe that if you're going to work with men in intimacy disorders, the idea of intimacy is dangerous, right? Because, and we can talk about that in a second. So if the idea of intimacy is dangerous, then you have to work to create a safe space where men can open up without being re-traumatized. And so that's why we do, the closed group model. And the third piece is, we're a program that's trauma focused, but we also specialize in men that have intimacy disorders that present with sex, love, and porn addiction. So while I referenced earlier, my intimacy disorder was really specific to alcohol, a lot of the guys that we work with were, had accidental or early exposure to pornographic material. They can come to us from, sexual assault or molestation at a young age. And or sometimes it's just a combination of absentee parenting and just exposure to older kids. And so ultimately it sets them down a path of essentially dopamine addiction that's very difficult to come back from. And so while they're with us for 2 weeks, we really work with what I would call like a surface to depth approach. So really at the beginning of the 2 weeks, establishing all the guys that are there, establishing all the fears and the misconception of what intimacy means, and then because as guys, we're only as vulnerable as the least vulnerable guy in the room. And so for us, it's really important to kind of get all the personalities and all the fears out early. So then we can really start to dive in to some of those early relationships and some of those misunderstood expectations as it comes to trust and authenticity, of what it means to truly come into a relationship as being who you are and not what you can do for others, or not how you can present a certain way to make somebody else feel better about themselves. And so we utilize a number of trauma modalities to really help with that work. So if any of you are familiar with brain spotting, we utilize brain spotting, which is really a rapid resolution method to connect past emotional wounds through memory and essentially language to be able to give a narrative to something that's been causing the person problems. We also utilize internal family systems, or IFS. And so that's some of Dick Schwartz's work around parts theory, and essentially just being able to allow the person to talk about the various parts of themselves that present in relationships and why they present in that way. And then we also utilize something called epigenetics, which is essentially saying that there's a genetic encoding that's passed down from generation to generation from an evolutionary perspective that sometimes is hindering how we engage in relationships. And, while this is all happening, there's also a 2-week partner support group that's being done in a virtual space. That's approximately 12 hours of coaching and case management to really allow the couple to come out on the other end in what I would say is as close to an even playing field as possible. One of the things that I've seen in a number of programs that either I've worked with or worked for is that if the person is going away to treatment and the loved one is not getting help or support or coaching, when their person comes out of treatment, oftentimes it's very easy to fall into the role of parent or child, or what I like to say is like prison warden prisoner. One person is really kind of like tapping their foot, kind of saying like, are we done with this? Are you doing the right behaviors? Are you engaging in the right things? And then the other person that went to treatment is constantly having to prove that they're kind of like living up to a certain expectation. And the problem with that is folks that are on the healing journey, some days I like to say there's varying heights for the daily bar. Some days, and if you come from a place of recovery, you'll know what I'm saying, where, some days you're crushing it. Some days you wake up early and you do some journaling and you go, you maybe see your therapist and you exercise a little bit. And I mean, you're just on, and that's a good day. And other days, it's life on life's terms. And like, you're just really happy that, you're safe and sober when your head hits the pillow, and so really being able to give both parties a realistic understanding of what to expect from each other. So that's kind of the goal of Begin Again Institute is how do we help men that have intimacy disorders better understand how to be intimate with another person that's an authentic representation of what they need to develop closeness, to have a longer, more committed relationship.
Well, I just, as we're talking, looked up the definition of intimacy. I just Googled it. And what comes up is close familiarity or friendship. Semicolon, closeness. And then another one is a private, cozy atmosphere. And then a euphemistic use of it is an intimate act, especially sexual intercourse. People use those terms interchangeably a lot of times. Conflate intimacy with sex. So I want to talk about, well, like I mentioned before, this idea that the way that we deepen intimacy is by talking about how we feel, and then touch on how it's relevant specifically, or how it pertains to men and manhood in our culture. Mm-hmm. And I think I've talked to you about this book that I've been reading. It's by Bell Hooks. Mm-hmm. It's called The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love. And I'm just going to pull out a couple paragraphs that I underlined early, like in the first chapter. Mm-hmm. The reality is that men are hurting, and that the whole culture responds to them by saying, please do not tell us what you feel. That's how she sees it. And, I can't really argue with that. I mean, a lot of times we hear people tell us they want us to tell them how we feel. But in reality, they can't accept it. They can't receive it. And a lot of times, you and I have talked about this a lot. One of the things that happens when we talk to someone, when we try to be intimate with someone emotionally who isn't at our same level emotionally in terms of emotional literacy, a lot of times they'll get angry, they'll be reactive, because it brings up their feelings that they're pretending not to feel. Like, they can't hear ours. And another line, if we cannot heal what we cannot feel by supporting patriarchal culture that socializes men to deny feelings, we doom them to live in states of emotional numbness. And I think for me, this idea of convincing men that they should feel, that they should stop denying their feelings, that they should talk about their feelings. And I mean, it's so deeply embedded in our culture that, you know, it's taboo that men do that.
Right.
And I think the argument that could be the winning argument as to why a man should is because if we don't, we experience that numbness.
Right.
But if we do, you know, think of how much energy we gain from our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
There's vitality that comes with actually experiencing your emotions. There's momentum. There's energy, you know, they can propel us and make us more who we are. That's how I see it.
I think you're right on all accords. I will say, you know, one of the things that you said that I kind of want to highlight is the emotional literacy, or as I've called it, emotional dyslexia, that our guys come into the program with is, I mean, it's a lot. And what I mean by that is a lot of the guys that come into the program, and I wouldn't say that it's our program specifically, they're kind of just heads in jars. Like there's no connection between their head and their heart.
Mm.
And a lot of that is, I'm not saying it's by design, but kind of how Bell Hooks talks about it. It's kind of service to the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
It's this piece of, I'm going to numb that aspect of you that could be problematic to the bigger picture that really says you have to conform to a certain way, you have to provide in a certain way, you have to love in a certain way, because if it doesn't fit, you know, then we have to discard it. And by the time that the guys come to our program, we hand them a feeling wheel. And we say, look, this is going to be a tool that we're going to use in the next 2 weeks. And consistently, we get the same thing every time, which is there's at least one or two guys that will raise their hand and they'll go, I don't need this. And we'll say, well, why? And they go, well, I know adjectives. That they are so disconnected from their emotion that they only see the emotions on the piece of paper as adjectives.
Mm-hmm.
And for 2 weeks, you know, we use a number of different interventions to be able to help them really connect with that authentic self that is able to feel. And that's the way that we're able to help them develop empathy for those that they've unintentionally, in a lot of cases, but definitely that they've hurt along the journey with their addiction. And a lot of the understanding with this emotional connection is developed through some of the first relationships that men encounter. And so it's a relationship with a primary caregiver. And that's mom or that's dad. And, you know, in some cases it's a, you know, if you would call it a surrogate parent.
Mm.
And I think Bell even talks about this in maybe later chapters around, you know, you don't have to come from, you know, a mom and a dad household to still fall victim to the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guys will fall into one of two camps. You know, we call it the hot and the cold box, or we call it the vacancy and the violation wounds. You know, either emotions are withheld or emotions are overexpressed to the point of to abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And so guys really start to understand that, like, oh, if my emotions cause needs, in terms of like, if I'm hungry, if I'm acting in a certain way because I'm fearful, we'll go with that one, right? I'm fearful, so therefore I'm worried, therefore I'm clingy because I'm afraid. And the message that I'm getting from my caregiver is, get off of me, you're embarrassing me. Right? If you're a 6 or 7 year old kid and you're holding on to your mom or dad's leg and they're going, get off me, you're being weird. I'm going to start to learn that asking for help when I'm afraid is not something that's acceptable. And so what we have found through the work that we do and the guys that come to our program is that eventually we start to understand that if I can't look to the people in my life that are supposed to take care of me, then I need to take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm the only one if my needs are the only ones that are at stake, then oftentimes it looks like I'm a pretty narcissistic person because I'm going to step over you to get what I need. And so many of the guys come to the program and their partners are just like, didn't you consider me when this was happening? Didn't you think about your family? And the reality is oftentimes they do as it relates to the aftermath or the consequences. But in the moment, from a neurobiological perspective, their brain is telling them, you have to get your needs met because nobody's coming. Nobody's going to care for you. Nobody's going to comfort you. And the thing about trauma, which all these men don't think that they have when they come to us, because trauma is this from a male perspective, we kind of hold it on a pedestal of like people that are traumatized are veterans or first responders or people that lived through 9/11. What we experience is not. But by the end of the 2 weeks, we start to really see how those traumas impact us. But the unique thing about trauma is it knows no timeline. And what I mean by that is, from a logical perspective, if I was bullied at the age of like 7 or 8, when I have a trauma response based on some of those bullyings at the age of, 30 something years old, my brain will take me back to the place where I'm 7 or 8 and I need to defend or respond out of fear based on that time and space. So I'm not actually acting like a rational adult.
Right.
And you can see it when you're doing work with men and women and adults that have past emotional wounds, because they're acting very childlike. They're actually being, in some cases, they're actually being, their brain is telling them you're 6 or 7 and you need to worry because bad things are happening. Even if there is no environmental fear or reason for concern.
Well, and to me, part of it is because if we're taught we shouldn't feel, and then we experience this adverse event, whatever it is, trauma, and we pretend not to feel what we feel, just kind of put blinders on and move on. The other part about it is it doesn't go away. We carry it around. So then when we experience something that triggers that emotion in us or summons it forth, we go back to where we were emotionally in our emotional development.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we still haven't experienced that sadness or pain or whatever it was.
The term that I often will use is emotional residue or relational residue, in that when you kind of peel off a soda can or a soda bottle, and there's that like sticky goo that's on the backside of the label, it's like that's what clings to every one of your relationships. And oftentimes, I mean, we the partners that are in our partner support program, they'll say, I've dated the same person over and over. They just had different names, and oftentimes that can be what we would call trauma repetition or trauma recreation. You're attracted to a certain type of person in a way to kind of resolve or kind of play out unresolved traumas. But because of the trauma that we're carrying, because of the unfinished emotional work, we always get in our way, so to speak. So, if I've had difficulty in past relationships with my partner being unfaithful, I'm more likely to pick a fight with my partner being unfaithful, even if they're not. And that's my brain saying, you probably shouldn't trust this. It's too good to be true. You probably should look through their phone. You probably should ask them where they're at. You probably should call them more. You probably should check in on them more. And that's this kind of, you want something to be able to, you want a relationship to be able to grow with intimacy. But when you're dealing with intimacy disorders, the closer you get, the more fear exists in the relationship. So it's, it's something that we've been doing since 2008. So we've got a pretty good idea of how to work through it and how to develop that empathy and that emotional literacy to deepen the relationship. But you're right. A lot of people don't fully understand what intimacy means. And therefore, when they start to see it with other people, it can often present as, there's a lot of underlying fear in that relationship.
Well, and, if your life experience is that when you're authentic emotionally, you're rejected, then it's pretty tricky, right?
Right.
A friend of mine was talking about recently an event in his childhood when, his older brother punched him, his eyes swelled shut. And I mean, he was just a little kid, like 7 or 8 years old. And of course he cried. And then he went to his mom. And his mom said, "Come back to me when you can stop crying and I will help you." And the context of this story was that, I'm learning how to feel because I haven't learned how to do that properly. He was acknowledging the significance of that and how it set the tone for his emotional experience going forward, or his relationship with his emotions, I guess I should say.
Well, and what we would say is, when those types of things happen, when what humans, not just men, but what humans are looking for is attunement. I'm emotionally dysregulated. I just got punched in the face. Like, can you comfort me, support me, hold me? And a lot of times, because of, what your parents had as a model for parenting, they can't. So they have this very, what some might say logical perspective of like, when you can stop crying, I can help you.
Right.
But what we're saying is like, I just need to be held right now.
Right.
And so we start to get this understanding that like people aren't going to care if I'm sad, or people aren't going to care if I'm worried, or people aren't going to care if I'm anxious. I need to take care of that. And the way that some of us can take care of that is through maladaptive behaviors. Be it substances, be it eating disorders, be it, gambling or pornography, or, the list kind of goes on and on. But imagine, so part of that then becomes when you talk to anybody in addiction, every one of them would say, I fully understand isolation. Because I understand that like I could not go outside of myself, or I had to go outside of myself to get my needs met. But the way that I did it was not in a way that I wanted to share with other people.
Because the way that I was socialized is to believe that that's entirely unacceptable. Right.
And the reality is like, and I don't think that this is like specific to addiction, but I think everybody kind of looks at somebody else and goes, they've got it together. I think the reality is everybody's doing the best that they can with what they were given, and nobody has it figured out.
Right.
That's, and this is just my personal belief of like, I think that's why we're tribal by nature. That's why we need community. It's because nobody has it figured out.
Yeah, we need each other.
Yeah.
And, the sad part about all this is that although it's generally acknowledged that intellectually that we need each other, we're also taught to repel each other. Keep distance between us, especially emotionally.
Yeah.
And the way it plays out in romantic relationships and adult life is, a lot of times women are dissatisfied because a man won't open up to her. He won't be, but he's been trained his entire life to not do that.
Right.
And it's embedded in his brain that if you do that, then, you're going to get hurt.
Right.
And so, which leads me to the topic of vulnerability. And, it's something we hear a lot these days, especially since Brene Brown kind of entered the scene, I don't know, 15 or so years ago, talking about vulnerability and how important it is to be vulnerable. But, ideally, if we weren't living in the type of culture where you can become attacked for being emotionally expressive or something other than numb, right?
Yeah.
Then you risk being hurt. It's even the need for vulnerability is a function of how we're socialized, how the cultural norms around emotions, right?
Well, and I think it's, and a large part of it is, it's both men and it's also, all parties are kind of contributing to this idea of like, if you want to be safe in society, you got to be a little numb. Because if I'm going to be truly vulnerable with you and share what my hopes or fears are, I remember this very well. I told my Nana, or my grandmother, she said, "Hey, you're going to go off to university, and what are you going to study?" And I said, "I really would like to study psychology." And I did. I was like, I think 11 or 12 years old. And I was like, I'm fascinated by how people work and how they connect and all these other things. And she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, Eddie, don't study psychology. You'll be so poor and the family will have to support you." And I remember this feeling of like, that was a genuine interest. That was a genuine bid for connection and vulnerability on my part.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody that I thought was safe.
Well, she asked for it, right? She asked for
exactly. That's one instance. But I can tell you that each one of the guys that comes through our program has had an instance like that, or many, many more.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, I'm inviting you to deepen our relationship.
But when you do, I'm going to invalidate you.
Right? Yeah. I'm not prepared for the possibility of me being something other than what she had in her mind determined me to be.
Mm-hmm. It's almost as if she was asking you to make sure that whatever you planned on being was something acceptable.
Oh, absolutely. It's what she was most likely looking for. And this is what I would say anybody that's looking to deepen the relationship with another person is, if you're asking the question, make sure that you're asking it from a place of curiosity and not just to validate like a preconceived notion.
Right.
Because what she wanted me to say, I'm almost positive, is I'd really like to go into finance, or I'd really like to go into business. Psychology was not on the table for her.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe, Ed, you could talk a little bit about what we're planning going forward with this. And then if you're open to it, maybe people can raise hands and we can have people come up. What do you think?
I like it. Well, like you had mentioned earlier, a lot of people say men don't talk. And you and I have both strong beliefs that unhealthy men don't talk. That healthy men are willing to put themselves out there and they're willing to have conversations and deepen our emotional connection. And so you and I kind of had this conversation and said, what if we put together, an 8-episode season where we kind of tackled some of the things that you and I both kind of believe are barriers to men living a more authentic life, and also for people who love men to better understand men.
Hmm.
And this is the first episode.
Look who we got in the room.
There's a lot more people than I thought.
So if anybody wants to come up, and if you have any comments or questions, we'd love to have you come up and further the discussion. Don't everybody raise your hand all at once. Oh, there's Jenna.
We got one.
Men are afraid of intimacy. Like, come on, let's be real, people.
Well, it is true. And I would say, Tom and I have talked about this, but oftentimes men who talk about emotions and vulnerability are dangerous to other men. Other men view it as a challenge or a threat. So,
it's interesting, Ed, that whole thing. I see so many guys out there, the guys who are traditionalist in terms of men. They want to say that, to me, and this is one of the topics, toxic masculinity. We're going to talk about that and how we're not saying masculinity is toxic. They're two different things. But, I see a lot of guys out there who they take exception to that idea. And there's this hostility toward the idea that we should feel, that we should be more connected to our emotions because, there's a belief that that makes us inherently weak. And it's not true. It's not true. And the opposite is actually true. Because if we're resisting it, then really we're dominated by it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's controlling us rather than the other way around. And it doesn't matter how long we want to pretend that we're not feeling. It's just a fact of life. Human beings feel. Mm-hmm. It's not, emotions are not gender dependent.
Right.
And we pretend they are.
I agree with that. But honestly, I think it's very rare to meet men that are open to talk about their, you know what I mean? They don't talk. And it's like how to make them open. Because I think most men, when it comes to that, they see it as a weakness. I don't know. That's my experience.
It made me kind of think of the men in my life are my brother and my dad. And I was thinking about how they interact together versus how my dad interacts with me, and kind of thinking back on my childhood with my dad. He was a lot more, he was a PE coach. So my brother and my dad talked about football and sports, and that's pretty much it. And my dad is also very empathetic and spiritual person, and talks about that kind of stuff with me. So it's just the difference in even the way they communicate. But my dad wasn't always as open. It's only in his later years. So I wonder if it's just an age thing. Guys just get a little bit more comfortable expressing.
Well, I think some of us become more secure in who we are over time, and that we don't care if we're judged or not at some point. But I think what's critical about this with guys is that we need to be able to have intimacy with other guys first.
Yeah.
And there's this author, Jack Donovan, who wrote this book, The Way of Men. And, I don't agree with everything he says, but I think it's a great book. And one of the things he talks about is when we talk about masculinity and judging ourselves as men from that perspective, it's not really about what women think of us. It's how we measure up to other men.
Yeah.
That's how we judge ourselves from a masculinity standpoint. But at an earlier time in my life, when it was apparent to me that there were no men who I could connect with on that level, or very few of them, and none that I saw as mentors, all guys my age, I needed mentors. It was much easier for me to talk about the deep, heavy stuff with women than it was with men. And I think that's what happens with a lot of guys. That's the only person that they feel, who they can trust with those things. And so then it eliminates opportunities to have deep connection with other men, which we need.
Mm-hmm.
We need. So many guys lean on their romantic partners so much for everything. And, the person we love can't be everything for us.
Hi.
Thanks for coming up.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me up. I just love everything that's going on right now. I just love your rooms, Tom, whenever you're in here.
Thank you.
It's nice to meet you, Ed, very, very much. You're welcome. So a lot of things that came up, so I'll just try to, let's see, one by one. So what came up for me towards the beginning of when I walked in is that I feel like spiritual men attract other men and spiritual women attract other women. And this is not something new. I heard it somewhere else, probably on Clubhouse, because I love Clubhouse. but like spiritual women attract other spiritual women, and then like men seem to be attracted to spiritual men, and like those spiritual men acknowledge that and they're okay with that because they're so comfortable in who they are. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But at the same time, I also realize that these spiritual men, you know, if they want a woman partner, then you know, it's just kind of like out there, you know. I think you know where I'm going with that, so I'll just leave it there. But I think that's a beautiful thing, because like I find myself attracted to all kinds of people, you know, because I see the souls, you know. And then the question I had was just from the perspective of a man, because like I've never had the opportunity to ask two great men up on stage here, thank you, this question. So my husband, you know, he has a really strong personality, and I mean, I can own up to the fact that, you know, he has that and some narcissistic personality, you know, just some traits, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I look up to him, you know, he's very good at everything he does and all of these great things, but it also causes him to be kind of insensitive. You know, one time I dared to call him a narcissist, like in a fight, because I was just so passionate, and he looked it up, and then he later, after we were more calm, and he was like, he looked a little bit hurt that I had called him that. And he's like, I read through it, I read about it, and the only thing that it seems that I connect with is the low empathy. Yeah, true, you know? So my question is, you know, because the further away we've gotten from that fight, then the traits, like I'm seeing them again. You know what I'm saying? It's like I tell him something, and then he kind of throws it in my face, and I'm like, oh, I'm the one that just said that, so you don't have to say it back to me, because I own myself, because I'm self-aware, you know. But I'm like, it's kind of annoying, you know. So do you guys have any advice on if that happens again? Like, how do I come at him? Because I love him so much, and I know he loves me, so I don't want to attack him for like saying something that I consider mean, because I can't get my feelings hurt. It's very hard for me to get my feelings hurt these days, you know, because I just accept people for who they are. But since I'm so close to him every single day, then it just kind of becomes hard when things just irritate me. So I hope that made sense. So, but if you guys need any clarification, let me know. Thank you.
Well, I mean, first of all, labels never help. That's the first thing I would say. But tell them how you feel about it. That's what we're talking about, right? That's what intimacy is. When you say things like blank, I feel whatever you feel. I feel irritated.
Well, I think the other thing too is like the more that you can bring it to, even though men can struggle with being emotionally illiterate, there are some universal emotions that are easier to connect with. And so, like Tom's saying, when you start to say, you know, when this happens, this is how I feel, and you're using some of these universal emotions, it allows us to do something called coupling, right? So you're saying when this happens, I feel scared, right? Then it allows him to sit in a space where he might feel more comfortable to say, you know, that wasn't my intention. This is actually what I was thinking. This is what I was feeling. But you know, when you're starting to, it's always best to kind of have some of these like follow-up conversations when emotions aren't so hot.
Yes, that's a good. I've tried that thing. That's a good piece.
You know, the other thing too is what Tom had kind of mentioned, and you know, of like guys need other guys, and guys need other guys, not in a way of like what I would say is like surface is safe. So a lot of guys have a lot of guy friends that they like, I don't know, they do fantasy football with, or you know, they play softball with or whatever, but they actually never talk about anything real. So it oftentimes will put you or their partners in a position where you're wearing multiple hats, or you're filling multiple roles that you didn't really sign up for. So you're hurting his feelings based on roles that you didn't sign up for.
Wow,
And
that is deep.
that kind of put you in a lose-lose situation.
Can you repeat that?
Guys need guys in their life that are more than just surface friends. So like Tom was saying, we need elders in our life that are teaching us about, parenting and being present and caring. And so oftentimes when we don't have those people in our life, we'll double down on our partners. And so we'll start to have you fill the role of people that we need in our life that you didn't sign up for. And so oftentimes when you're acting in a very human way, you're hurting our feelings, or you're causing us distress based on emotions or based on a role that you never signed up for or know about. So you might be acting in a completely healthy role as my wife, but as my business coach, you really hurt my feelings right now.
Or my mother,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, don't even get me started on the mother wound.
And the other part of that is that, as guys, if we don't have those other relationships with men who we're close to, who we can talk to about the things we struggle with or whatever, and then we take that to our wife or girlfriend or whatever, and then it's too much. We're asking too much of them, and to basically, like you said, assume a role that they didn't sign up for,
Right.
She wants to be the woman who sleeps with you, not the woman who coddles you. Right.
Right.
And then we wonder why people stop having sex. And you know what I mean? It's like,
oh yeah,
it gets in the way.
Ooh, oh my gosh. So I just have so many epiphanies and revelations and just beautiful things. Okay, you guys? Woo! Okay, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. I got off work. I'm going to have to decompress and then take this all in, like, once I get home. Cause, okay. So yes,
so whatever
yes,
you
yes,
do,
yes. Yes,
whatever
yes,
you
all of
do,
it.
don't take all of this energy and emotion right into your relationship.
Right.
And say,
No, I'm really careful. Jenna and Chelsea know about me.
Yeah, I'm cracking up over here. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Bitch is
Jenna
fired
and Chelsea,
up.
you feel me, right? You guys know I'm fired up. I'm sure you guys can tell, but I am really good at just kind of managing what's going on. But I'm also like batshit passionate. So just the fact that you guys gave me this information that I've never heard, and that's exactly why I hesitated so much to even speak, because I'm like, I have these old ideas where it's like private stuff. But no, I wanted some actual advice and you guys gave it to me. So like the surface friends, yes, like I'm not going to air out his business, but yes, like I'm literally, it's all running in my head. The parent thing, yes. The mom, the dad thing. I appreciate you guys. I want to have sex with him. I don't want to coddle him. Yes. Thank you. So thank you guys for everything. You guys gave me so much value. Like, you don't even know. It's like to the moon. Thank you guys.
Other than like the age thing that I was kind of thinking about, like with guys, like talking more, vulnerably. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, like maybe it's where I live. Like maybe Florida just doesn't have like, no, I think it is an age thing. Like, I'm really going to stick by this. Like, and maybe even father type things. Like, but when you guys have kids, then you're like a different guy.
Well, that's undisputable. I mean, that changes everything.
Kids change everything.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in regards to the thing you said, like about like guys who like want women to play extra roles, okay? So say you're not the type of woman that like is willing to pick up any of those extra roles. Like, should you be more willing to pick up the roles or no?
I mean, I think the big thing is just mirroring back to your partner what they're asking you to do. And so ideally the answer should be no. And unless it's something that you've talked about, I don't think anybody should put additional expectations on anybody without having a conversation first. That kind of sounds like, I know people use this term a lot, but that kind of sounds like gaslighting to me.
I can be attuned to my partner and validate my partner without accepting the responsibility as I'm going to be your primary support in this area of your life. Right.
Right.
But that requires, all of this requires intimacy. Because if you can't have a conversation about what you're feeling, then you can't get to that depth where you can say, listen, I love you. I want to support you, but all this is too much for me and it doesn't turn me on. So go talk to one of your buddies, or whoever. In order to be real and to even acknowledge all that stuff, first we have to be open to having an emotional experience and then talking about it, That's why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
That help, Jenna?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the other thing about this is we put these expectations on the people we love without recognizing it. We don't know we're doing it if we're not tuned into ourselves enough.
I think I struggle with validating people, validating a partner. I don't know why, but I feel that way.
Well, and I think the thing that we can do as partners is model, what we need by articulating it. Just saying, my wife will do this, with me, where she'll just say, I really just need for you to listen. I don't need you to fix anything. I don't need you to give me solutions. I just need you to listen. And so she's telling me exactly what she needs, which, makes it easier for me to match that attunement, like Tom was referencing. And I just think that that's so key in starting to understand when you're moving into a different role that maybe the other person doesn't necessarily want. Because then it makes it easier to offer, like Tom was saying, offer that to a different space. Because if I'm going to my wife and saying, I really need business advice, she'd go, you really need to talk to somebody else.
Well, in my world, where it comes up a lot as an addictions counselor is, parents wanting to monitor their kids' behavior. Are you doing the things you need to do to protect your recovery? Which, that's a parent shouldn't have to worry about that stuff, or a spouse shouldn't have to worry. It's too much. It's a lot of pressure, when it interferes with the quality of the relationship. This has been great, man. I'm excited about how this has gone.
I've had a lot of fun.
I love that they love you.
Me too. I mean, I'm glad I'm being accepted.
Yeah.
Into the Tom circle.
Well, I thought when you were talking about your wife, I thought you were didn't you tell me that occasionally she'll tell you maybe you should call Tom?
Oh yeah. No, she does. I mean, and this is because we do have these people. She knows about my relationship with you, and she knows about my relationships with other guys in my life, and she'll just say, I think you should probably talk to so and so, and it helps.
Yeah, and we got into this a while back when I had this author Cleo Stiller on my podcast, who wrote Modern Manhood. And one of the things she talked about is how guys really lack, in general, the men that she talked to. She interviewed a bunch of men about lots of different aspects of life. And one of the common themes that she encountered is that guys don't have deep relationships with other men that often. A lot of guys don't. And she even talked about how in her life and in her family, they always kind of made a joke of it with her dad. Dad has no friends. You know, that's the way they talked about it, because her mom was the only person he confided in about anything. And, you know, I think that works sometimes, but, and it's not even a question of whether it's right or wrong or good or bad, or it's more about, you know, if I'm going to be in an intimate relationship with someone, I want it to be great. You know, I want it, if I'm in love with somebody, I want it to be fantastic. You know, I don't want to be too much. I don't want to ask too much. And I don't want to pretend that I can meet all of her needs. Right? Because it's unrealistic. So what are we talking about next week, Ed?
Emotions and gender.
I think you're right. I think that's what it is. I love having conversations like this, and I'm excited about doing this. This is going to be fun. I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate you. So next week is, in fact, emotions are not gender specific.
Yeah, we don't have to pretend that we don't have emotions, which I think that's the big, that's the beginning layer of getting somewhere with all this, is to stop denying we have an emotional experience in the first place.
Right.
Love you, dude.
Love you too, man.
Be a man. Dress for success. Wear the pants in the relationship. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Give the shirt off your back, but don't lose your shirt. Are you really going to wear that shirt? Be a man. Be a ladies' man. Be the man at home. Make a man out of that kid. Sometimes you have to manhandle a situation to show them you're the man. Act like a man. Be the man at the gym. Is that all you can lift? Man up. Whoops. Man down. Be a man. Carry on. Carry your weight. Carry your water. Carry the ball across the goal line. Be a man. Take a chance. Take a risk. Take the job. Take the money. Don't take more than you give. Don't take any crap. Be a man. Be the man at your job. Work like a man. Be successful. Hustle. A hardworking man is a happy man. Never send a boy to do a man's job. Be a man. Take it seriously. Take a joke. Never let him see you sweat. Drink like a man. Smoke like a man. Fight like a man. Be a man. Tough it out. Don't cry. Don't complain. Don't worry. And don't trust doctors. Die like a man.